Welcome to Mining the Mysteries, a catechetical podcast that explores the depths of our Orthodox and Catholic faith in the English tradition. I'm Matthew Stewart, Digital Media Director for the Anglican Province of America, along with your hosts Father Wade Miller and Father Randall Russell from St. Philip's Anglican Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. We're glad to have you with us as we dig deeper into the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. Welcome back, folks. Today we have a very special guest with us. We have Bishop David Haynes. He is the missionary bishop for the Anglican Province of America. And I will go ahead and let Father Miller introduce Bishop David, and he will tell us a little bit about our global missions. Father Miller?
It is great to have Bishop David with us, so welcome, Your Grace. Wonderful to have you. What I thought I would do, because if I do introduce you, all I'm going to do is talk about Ohio State. So what I thought I would do is just have you give us a brief background and talk about how it was growing up in Mississippi. So.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real honor to be able to be on here today and to be able to share this with you. So I'm one of those rare organisms, I guess, since I only ever been Anglican. So I was born, as you may know, in England. So I was baptized in the Church of England. My parents moved when I was 4. Actually, I was 3. I had my 4th birthday on the boat going to South Africa. So we moved to South Africa in the time before there were commercial flights. So that gives you a little time indication. So I had my 4th birthday on the ship going to South Africa. I was then raised in South Africa, was in the Anglican Church there, was confirmed in that church, and I served in the school church that we had associated with the school that I attended, a boarding school, English-style boarding school. We had an Anglican church, and I served there as an acolyte, as a lay reader, and then eventually in my senior year, I was the master, in charge of the master of ceremonies, if you like, for the acolytes, in charge of these little squirts all over the place and trying to keep order. And then I went in, studied in university, was intending to be a world famous botanist. And that worked out great, as you can tell. So I went to university in South Africa and did up through a master's in science, and then came to the US, to Ohio State University, to do a PhD in botany. And I never did any homework, so I didn't know about the Episcopal Church, and I ended up in an Anglican church, which was part of the Continuum at the time. So it was part of a group called the Anglican Right Jurisdiction of the Americas, which was a second group that formed after the initial ACNA came out in the late 1970s, and then divided into the 3 main groups: the Anglican Catholic Church, United Episcopal Church of North America, and at the time, the Diocese of Christ the King later became Province of Christ the King. And so there was a second group of bishops that were consecrated after that. They formed an umbrella which was supposed to take in the refugees of the Episcopal Church before they decided exactly which one of those 3 churches they wanted to be attached to. And so the idea was that it would go away eventually, but the church I attended was part of that group, and I had an experience on one of my field trips, and then was asked by the priest after I returned. It was a botany field trip in Southern Africa, and after I returned, he asked me if I had ever considered a call to the priesthood, and so I shared the experience with him, and he said he thought I should talk to the bishop, and so I talked to the bishop at the time, Bishop G. Wayne Craig, one of the second group of bishops that were consecrated after St. Louis, and I had a year of discernment, and then I read for holy orders, did not go to seminary, but I was working on my PhD at the same time. And so that's how I was ordained to the diaconate. That was back in 1991. And then still finishing the PhD, thought I was finishing the PhD. I had to find employment. I was still on a visa, so I could only teach. And so I had an opportunity to teach at Ohio Northern University. And while I was there, I asked and spoke with Bishop G. Wayne Craig. There was a small Anglican church there, and so I served there. They were in a different jurisdiction that was part of the ACA at the time. And so I worked and was licensed by Bishop Clavier as a deacon, eventually became the deacon in charge of that parish, and was a deacon for 12 years, a long, tortured history. And then eventually I studied or completed enough studies at Church of God Seminary in Finley without doing the degree, and then went back. I went several times through the Board of Examining Chaplains, but the jurisdictions changed a little bit a couple of times. We had some upheavals, as people know. And then eventually in 2003, I was then ordained a priest by Bishop Grundorf in Columbus, Ohio, where I had started at the same church that I had originally gone to. But we did it there because that was the only church that was large enough for us to have that. The church in Lima was too small.
And that's today, that's Christ Anglican, is that right?
That's Christ Church Anglican. They're still not in the same location, but they are in the Columbus area.
Okay.
And they're part of the Episcopal Missionary Church group.
Yeah.
That used to be under Bishop Millsap. So I don't know, I forget who the new presiding bishop for that group is.
Okay. That's great. Well, thank you. It's interesting background. There's so much we could probably do a whole episode just on your background, but we will move forward here. So I guess the first question that some will have, especially because we do have a fair amount of people that listen to us that are not Anglican.
Cool.
And so the question is, what is a missionary bishop, and what role does this play in a church, in a diocese, in a jurisdiction?
So a missionary bishop, so in my case, it's a little different in the sense that missionary bishops really look at areas, territories where we largely don't have churches, or we have relatively few churches or people with some interest, and then work to try to establish churches in those places. So I do the groundbreaking things. Now, I'm not really one of those kinds of bishops. I'm really strictly, almost primarily an administrator.
Okay.
If you think about that. Just because of the types of missions that we have, the partnerships really, and we can talk about that in just a minute. But so I'm an administrator primarily. I'm a liaison, if you like, between our metropolitan bishop, so the provincial part of our church, and our overseas clergy and churches.
Okay.
And I work to, facilitate planning, help them with planning, help them in terms of administrating funds. So I work very closely. I'm our treasurer's worst nightmare. I've worked with him quite often. I'm involved, of course, with fundraising, trying to promote these ideas. And then in the actual areas where we work, we provide Episcopal oversight and also training for clergy, advising, guiding, and, supporting as a shepherd ought to anyway. I mean, it's the same kind of things you do in a parish as a parish priest, if you think about that. But you're doing it with people that you can't see every day, that you have to communicate via email or all of the other social media things that they use. I have WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. I mean, they come in all ways, Viber. So I have to be on all of those wretched things and deal with them. And then, you have the language issues as well.
Sure.
So sometimes things are lost in translation. It's good if they send me it in writing, then I can usually use Google Translate to work out what it is they're saying. And I can then send back, when I do a response back, I usually do both English and also the language. Sorry about that phone.
No, you're fine. Yes. Well, though, that's good. So, so today, when we think about, global missions or overseas missions, especially in our context in this country and also in the West in general, there's this whole kind of stigma about colonialism and the fact that, this colonization happened as English missionaries went over, and then they tried to make Africans English and all that. And so Talk about that in terms of its relationship to global missions and help educate us on breaking down maybe some of that stereotype.
So yeah, so for us it's very different. We're not taking our American clergy and we're not training them and in immersing them in a foreign culture, teaching them a language and sending them out there where they're very obviously distinctive from the local population. I mean, they may sound the same, may talk the language, but it's very hard to have a full understanding of the culture that you're working in. And it's very hard to understand when you send that kind of missionary into those places to have a real sense of what the real needs are, where people really are, and what cultural influences you really are dealing with. They go for 5 years or 10 years and they learn some of those things and they can dodge some of the bullets, but you don't get a very good understanding of the culture, the people, and the real needs. So our ideas have always been that we wanted to have indigenous clergy
Mm.
that are raised up and that are taking the gospel to their own people. And so that's our model. The model we use, we describe it as a partnership model. So my actual title is, so I am the missionary bishop for global partnerships of the Anglican province of America. That's my real title.
Okay.
So the idea is that we would encourage people who are, looking to become clergy and enable them through support. So financial support, educational support, and episcopal oversight and training so that they can go out, minister to their people, build churches and share the gospel. So that's the real, local indigenous clergy have a much greater impact in communities. They know people, they know, there's all kinds of networking that an ordinary Anglo missionary can't really develop
Yeah.
because they're always going to be seen as outsiders.
Mhm.
Now, if you stand in a room of short brown people and you're a white person and very tall, you're obviously different. So,
Yeah.
we look different when we go, and everybody knows that, but they also know that we're not permanently there.
Mhm.
The idea is we want to raise up enough clergy, and some of those clergy hopefully will become in time bishops, and they will have their own operations. We have that, of course, in some situations in our global partnerships, but that's the whole plan. The plan is not for us to continue to be the episcopal overseers of all of these places,
Mm. Mm.
but we have to have a shared relationship.
Mhm.
That makes it tenuous, though, because if there's something they don't like, they can walk away.
Yeah.
And, at the same time, we have that option also, but we invest money and time and other resources to try to bring those people along. So I think the real thing the most important thing that we do is that we build personal relationships between clergy
Mhm.
and ourselves. So we establish a very good understanding and trust so that we can, when we talk, they can give us a list of priorities and we can honestly say, well, we can help with some of these. I don't know that that's such a great one, but if that works out for you, that'll be great. But I can't go to people and ask them to support this particular idea
Yeah.
financially or something or in that way.
Mm. No, that's good. Tell me if I'm off here, but one of the things, even when I was going to a Christian college, which conservative Christian college,
Mm.
there was this real emphasis on multiculturalism, and I always felt a bit uncomfortable because the church does have its own culture. You're
Oh,
called to come into a culture.
right.
At the same time, as you just alluded to, if you're over in Africa or India, there's certain customs, local customs that, that's not a part of the bigger overall arching culture that we're called to as Christianity. And Bishop, and this will resonate, I think, with what you're talking to us about. And I'm not picking on the Roman Catholic Church, but in some of the Latin American cultures. It seems like, in embracing a multiculturalism, they've also embraced certain syncretistic kind of practices. I know that's not on the sheet I sent you as far
Oh,
as
no, that's
questions,
fine.
but
Yeah.
but could you speak to that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, we deal with that all the time. I mean, there is syncretism that happens. And some things we had an experience here in Ecuador not long ago, last year, in fact. We had this, what looked like to us, some kind of, outside Christianity type of event that took place before confirmation. And we watched this, and Father Paul and I were there. But we asked the questions afterwards. And so it turns out it's taken something from the culture, it's incorporated it into the church. They recognize that previously there had been some pagan, connections with that, but they've severed those and made it sort of cleaned it up, I should say, as far as we can tell, cleaned it up and made it appropriate for these young people that are, coming into to be confirmed. And they had this wonderful, in that whole ceremony, they have this wonderful thing where these young people that are coming to be confirmed, they kneel down in front of their parents.
Mm.
They confess their infractions as children to their parents, things they've never told them before.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, that is a very moving, and it was a tearful and beautiful thing. But initially it looked like it was something that was, outside of the church.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be something that they've made it into, a really beautiful addition to the ceremony.
Mm.
Of course, as you can expect, so the languages are different, the music is different, and so some of the emphasis is different.
Mm.
And, we run into some of those issues. We've tried to introduce and to make things as Anglican as we can without, of course, making it completely Anglo, because it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So we try to introduce the idea, especially in Ecuador, that try to talk to them about, changing the orientation for worship, because right now they worship, and they will continue to worship this way, as you'll hear in a minute, the reason why, facing the congregation instead of facing, the altar. And so I challenged them and said, this is what we typically do. They want to be traditional, but they said, no, we can't do that.
Mm.
And I said, okay, what's the reason? He said, yes, for us, because of the connection with the Roman Church previously, but also the idea, so for them, culturally, it's very rude to have your back to people.
Mm.
And also, they consider God to be all around, not just at the eastern side of the church.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that they were basically Roman Catholic. So I understand that. So it's a cultural divide. I know not all of our clergy would say, well, that's not quite proper. And it isn't quite proper in that sense. But there's a lot that is very proper, and a lot that is, very, very strong, faith-based, and supports our Anglican position very well.
Mm.
And it's really strongly Christian. It's, the main emphasis is really on the Christianity.
Yeah.
We do have, you talk about Roman Catholicism, we have, of course, at least in 3 countries, we have overarching Roman Catholicism that impacts the culture greatly.
Sure.
And most of our people come from that Roman Catholic culture. So that has a major impact. India is the one that's completely devoid of that influence.
Okay. No, I think that's great, because, that's always the challenge when you talk about
Absolutely.
global missions. How do you be pastoral and yet not so accommodating that you're allowing bad stuff in? And I think what you just said, even, saying mass, facing the people, I know, I mean, that's not the way we do it here, and it's not the way that our churches do it. However, it's also not such a major hill that you break fellowship or you try to get them to do something that is so foreign to them in terms of, because they're trying to be pastoral as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
And they want to please us. They want to be, they love the idea of being part of the APA. That's their strongest desire.
Mm.
You know, some of them came to us more recently because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be part of this group, and that was their choice. You know, coming out of other backgrounds, out of Roman Catholicism and the Episcopal Church for some of them, and coming into a more traditional Anglican setting.
Yeah.
That's what they've sought, and so we try to do and provide what they're asking for.
That's great. That's
You know,
great.
as much as possible without us infringing on our basic Christian understanding and basic Anglican tenets.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. No, that's great. Before I ask you the next question, you mentioned Father Paul. I just let our
Sure.
listeners know Father Paul Rivard is at St. George the Martyr in Simpsonville outside of Greenville. Great priest, a dear friend of mine. So if you're in that area and you're looking for a church, go there. And then we also didn't mention, so Bishop David is not only the missionary bishop, but he's also the rector of All Saints in Wilmington, North Carolina. So if you're
Right.
looking for a church in that area, we wholeheartedly, I've worshiped there a few times, and it's a great parish. So where are the missions for that we support and that we have this partnership with?
So we have 4 countries that we operate in currently. So we have Ecuador, we have Haiti, we have India, southern India, and the Philippines. Those are the 4 countries, the 4 regions that we are currently in. Now we have inquiries all the time from other areas, and so there may be some that come in the next year or so, or even several months right now. So I have some that are very interested and that are in some kind of situation.
Okay.
But it's going to mean some major changes for them to come over. So the most recent of ours is the Ecuadorian one, and that's one of the most interesting ones. So the name for that church is the Indigenous Pastoral of the Anglican Province of America in Ecuador.
Wow.
So a nice short name.
Yeah.
Well, IPAPAE. So that's the acronym that we use.
Okay.
So they're a group of people. So if you understand what happened, they're Quechua people native to the high Andes, and we operate in the province of Chimborazo in Ecuador. And so they're a group of people that the Quechua were actually enslaved until 1968.
Mm.
Many of them, not all of them, but a large number of them in what was the hacienda system, which was established by the Roman Catholic Church. So they had wanted to be have an indigenous church. They wanted to sort of preserve their culture after they were given their freedom, and they would also like to have a church because they are principally now Catholic Christians, but they're Christians principally. Some are evangelical. But in any event, the Roman Catholic the Catholic Church gave them sort of an in-between. So they said, well, we'll ordain a few of you. They ordained 2 men as priests, and they ordained another 10 or so indigenous as deacons.
Okay.
But they said, but you can't have your own indigenous church.
Mm.
You still be part of us, and you will have, the usual, Episcopal oversight from mixed ethnicity Ecuadorians, not true natives.
Mm.
And that was it was okay for a little bit, but they could see there was no future. And then they recognized, of course, the fact that they built most of the churches as slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And now, they still couldn't really take control. So then they moved into the Episcopal Church because it looked like a good option for them. And then within a couple of years, they started to get the pressure to conform to some of the more liberal changes in the Episcopal Church. So they wanted them to start ordaining women, which they were not prepared to do because culturally it didn't suit. It just doesn't fit with their culture. And they also understood it, theologically, that was something that they didn't think that they could support in the simplest way that they could understand it. And then came the pressure later on. They actually pressured one of the deacons who was unmarried. They said you need to get the word out that he's actually homosexual, and to make it appropriate. And of course, poor Asensio, he's a delightful man and a gentle soul, and it's like he's horrified, and so are all of them. So they decided we cannot stay in the Episcopal Church. So they've sought through people that were working with them. Samaritan's Purse was doing development, and there were some folks that were Samaritan's Purse, but had also formed another development group called Worthy Endeavors. Through them, they appealed and they said, could you find us somebody who's Anglican and Orthodox and not going to make us do these crazy things, and will also enable us to have an indigenous church? So the man in charge, Richard Todd, met with Bishop Grundorf, and so we started that process back, so almost 10 years ago now, so 2016.
Okay.
When we finally went through all of this, we had to register, go through the government, register them in the Department of Cults and Religion, and they had to look at us, and we had to send all these legal documents. But they're established, and they're doing pretty well. We've had some upheavals, but right now we have 16 clergy.
Okay.
We have 5 priests, and it turns out that they're not all indigenous now. So I warned them in the beginning that if the church grows, you may not only, have indigenous people, but they have Father Gustavo, who's not an indigenous, but he's really is one of them in so many ways. And so they do a wonderful job.
Mm.
We have 22 church buildings there in 22 communities. And then there's actually 33 communities where we minister.
Okay.
And so the total people, and they're not all Anglicans, but the total number of people is around 20,000.
Okay.
It's a large number of people. They're not all Anglicans. Some are still Roman, some are evangelical, but a large proportion of those communities now have become Anglican
Okay.
because of the indigenous nature and flavor.
Yeah.
So-
And I know you had told me this before because you've gone over there before, even Bishop
Right.
Chad's gone over there with you.
Oh yeah, Bishop Chad has been there.
Yeah.
He's beer drinking amongst the clergy.
That's-
Open beer. They did drink beer, but they were a little shy about doing it, but he encouraged them to do it openly still. Every time we go somewhere now, we have beer.
Yeah. But he was telling me the elevation at
Oh, yes.
first kind of got to him a little bit. How high is that in Ecuador in terms of the meeting, their community
So,
up there?
yeah, so the communities are very high. So we come into Quito, obviously flying to Quito. Quito is about between 6,000 and 7,000 feet above sea level. And then we drive south, but we actually go up to Riobamba. So Riobamba is somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000
Wow.
feet.
Yeah.
And then we go further south to where we have the Cathedral Guamati. It's almost 12,000 feet.
Wow.
So you're out of breath if you have to bend over to tie your shoelaces. And it does take adjustment, but that's why we fly into Quito, spend the night there, and then travel the next day. That helps you get a little bit adjusted to that elevation.
Wow. Wow. That's
And then we were at a local community last time, and I could not get up the top of the mountain, and it was about 14,000 feet.
wow.
I just could not catch breath. I mean, walking up a steep mountain, it's more than 45 degrees up, and
Wow.
they had a cistern at the top that needed blessed. Anyway, I could not do it, so I sent Father Paul, and I blessed the lower ones. So that was something.
Yeah.
It's good to Father Paul is an excellent person to have with me, and we need somebody who knows all of the workings, and now he's been to all of them in case something could happen.
Sure.
I mean, a bus accident, a truck accident. I mean, who knows, an assassination attempt. Suddenly I could be gone, and then, there's a lot of information that could be lost. So he's got all those connections.
Wow. So I'm maybe I'm envisioning this the wrong way, but what are the roads once you get up past 8,000 feet? I mean, to actually ascend up there, what is that like? What kind of
Yeah.
vehicle do you take?
Well, we rent vehicles when we go,
Okay.
and the vehicle struggles,
Mm.
honestly, even though they're, adjusted for that
Yeah.
country. And so in Ecuador, the vehicles, the roads are pretty rough and they're tough to get up.
Mm.
And so, but we have to drive up to, and most of these villages and communities we can get to, but it's rough driving. They're gravel and dirt roads,
Wow.
and they're narrow, and they're dry mostly. So that's the good part.
Yeah.
We don't have, being right on the equator like that, temperatures are pretty moderate most of the time. In fact, I'm cold most of the time there. So it's between 50 and 65 degrees is normally the temperature.
Okay.
And even though it's right on the equator,
Yeah.
but the elevation makes it cool. So
Probably no guardrails then as you're ascending up there.
there's no guardrails. There's a mountain. I mean, animals and a few vehicles go up and down.
Okay.
Actually, some of them, they have buses go up and down. So that's really more of an adventure when you are going up and then there's a bus that actually fills the whole road coming down.
Oh, wow.
So you look for somewhere to go and not over the edge either, somewhere close to the mountainside,
Wow.
not the other side. So that we can pass each other. And oftentimes we'd have to back down so to let the bus find a place where there's a little cutout in the road, some place that the bus can get by.
Wow. So I have a fear of heights. So you even describing that's making me a little wheezy. So.
We had one of the. So in Ecuador, we don't do the funding part. So the funding is done through Worthy Endeavors, and one of their beneficiaries came with us on one of the trips, and he did not enjoy the driving, especially when we went actually to a higher place. We did a lake. Bishop Chad was with us. And I wasn't the bishop, of course, then. And we went there and we did a late in the afternoon confirmation. And so it was getting dark and almost dark when we were coming down.
Wow.
He was not a happy camper.
I'm sure.
And he was very upset with Bishop Chad because Bishop Chad, had to do the service, and you just can't cut stuff very easily. So it just takes time. Things have to be translated and explained. So there's a lot of time in all these things. So that's sort of Ecuador. Haiti, the roads are also very bad. And they're a real challenge. And Haiti has other challenges, of course.
Sure.
India, the roads are also fairly, depending on where you are. So to the villages, they're pretty bad. The main roads are not too bad as you travel between the main places that we arrive and some of the other. There's some highways that are pretty good overall. And then in the Philippines, it's also very variable. There's good highways, and then we're off to the local communities, and the roads are a lot different.
Wow.
But Philippines is more of a challenge because you have, a lot of islands, and so you have water in between. You have to get everything onto a ferry, including the truck. So you drive for several hours, then you get onto a ferry boat for 2 hours, and drive off the ferry, and drive another 3 hours before you get to where you need to be.
Wow.
Long, hard, dusty trips.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a challenge, but man, it is so great that
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, the next question is kind of a fun question, because I'm sure some people, after even hearing this about Ecuador, they're probably wondering, okay, what are some of the most unique situations, or what are some of the most unique things you've eaten as you've taken trips over there?
So in Ecuador is interesting. So Ecuador, the Quechua people, protein is a difficult thing for them. And raising animals at those high altitudes is hard. They do have cattle, and they have sheep, and they have pigs. So we do have some of that, but their favorite food is guinea pig, called hui. So they grow these guinea pigs, and then as a guest of honor, you get a whole guinea pig, roasted guinea pig with the head and the beautiful 2 rodent teeth. So it's delightful. The meat is actually, it's not too bad. I won't say it's like chicken. It's more greasy than chicken, that's for sure. If it's well done, they're properly done. They're very nice. But they have a lot of starches. So we have potatoes, and you have fava beans, and you have rice, and you have corn. So they grow the large corn.
Okay.
And then have some other things. They like to make soups. We do have beef, and sometimes in Ecuador. So in the Philippines, the most difficult food, and we have not yet eaten it, is called balut. It's a fertilized duck egg.
Okay.
You can get them at different stages of fertilization. And actually, some of the Filipinos, Father Paul was mentioning just the other day, some of the Filipinos will eat it, but they turn the lights out when they eat.
Really?
So, because you imagine you're eating an egg, and in the egg you have a young chick, and you can see that some of them are much further developed. In fact, Father Paul was almost going to try it at one time, and so I explained some of the biology of what he was about to consume, and so that ended it right there.
I'm sure.
And I said, "Oh," he said, "I'm going to just drink this liquid." And I said, "Oh, that's the amniotic fluid."
Oh no.
And so he said, "Okay, we're done." Good.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's so
I've
funny.
I've seen pictures of balut, and really, it is a little baby chicken. And yeah,
Yeah, it's a little duckling.
yeah, a little duckling. Sorry, and you see the little beak and the head, and
It's all there.
it's all there. Yeah,
That's
it's
And you can get it in different stages, so they can be a little more advanced or a little less advanced.
yeah.
Actually, one of our clergy, his main source of income is that he distributes those. He doesn't grow them, but he collects them from someone who produces them, and he has a run. He runs from his home in Baguio all the way down to Manila, and all of the roadside stalls on that main highway, he supplies most of those people.
Wow.
So, and then, buses and all kinds of traffic stops there. So he's very important. So when we travel and we come down that road and we're going elsewhere to do church business, he's not doing deliveries, but all the people, he knows everybody, every other roadside store, we have to stop and honk, and he has to shout and say, I'll be back next week and bring, I'm not doing deliveries this week. Remember. So they say, yeah, hurry back. We need more. So yeah, so balut is a big deal.
Wow.
And it is, I think it is sort of a specialist and, for special occasion type food, but they seem to eat it pretty regularly
Mm,
as well. So,
that's
so
great.
lots of rice, and lots of all these places eat rice.
Yeah.
India, rice. Indian food is wonderful. Lots of spice and curries. And in the South, mostly vegetarian, but they always add meat because we're there.
Oh, okay.
That's we have a variety of different foods, and really very good.
Yeah.
And we eat in roadside places, and where you can see the food prepared. So those are the better places to eat
Mm-hmm.
because everything's right fresh. They don't have refrigeration, so stuff can't be very old.
Yeah.
Right. So for the most part, we really haven't gotten sick from food.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one occasion Bishop Grundhoff did get sick from food. We stopped at a roadside restaurant in Ecuador, and he was sick on the flight home, and something he'd ate there
Mm.
was slightly off. So,
Yeah.
and that's possible.
Yeah.
And hotels are sort of dangerous too, because they put food out under lights or heat lamps, and then you don't know quite how long it's been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it looks good, and you think it's safer because it looks cleaner, but it may not be the better option.
Mm.
Roadside, local people with dirty hands is often a better option.
Wow.
This is cooked and fresh right there.
Yeah.
So many times.
Yeah.
So
No, that's interesting. Well, a question, obviously we all know the statistics and everything in this country about anxiety and depression and things like that. Do you have to deal with some of those kind of issues in places like Ecuador, Haiti, places like that?
yeah, we do. We have clergy and we become disillusioned with things. It's a tough go.
Yeah.
They really do the hard work. So it is very hard for them. They're living right at the edge of poverty, most of our clergy. So we don't pay them salaries or support them in that way.
Mhm.
We support the diocese, and we'll refund them travel expenses, those kinds of things. We give them there's some small allowance for each of them, but it could be called a salary, not enough for them to live off.
Wow.
So it can become depressing. I talked with several of them, and they've, been quitting and, been step back from doing this and doing that ministry. And it is tough. It's happened in the Philippines several times. It's happened in Ecuador. Well, we just have some very well-educated, some of our priests are well-educated, and they're also connected with the university. And then they have a lot of demands placed on them from the university. So they've
Mm.
so stepped back.
Mhm.
And then, I've always allowed them to do that. And so what's happened is generally I just got an email just a week or so ago. And so one of our clergy didn't see his way forward to continue, but was going to, still remain a priest, now just emailed me and said, I only have another year left of this university stuff and I'll be back. I can't wait to be back in the ministry and back
Mm.
with the people and that sort of stuff. So,
Mm.
and then it's very tough because there are clashes and there are challenges that are under the surface that I don't know about all the time. And, they're challenged in a number of different ways
Mm.
that I can't fully relate to since I'm not part of the culture, but I understand that they're going through some of those things.
Mm.
They have people as difficult and as treacherous as our own parishioners can be at times, so, and even clergy to clergy. I mean, they make promises and they don't show up to do services. And
Mm.
you have to say, well, what happened here? Why was there nobody there for this
Yeah.
particular Sunday? What happened? Why didn't they show up? Is there some reason?
Yeah.
And, sometimes it is transportation. Getting to places is a tough deal. I mean, most of us probably wouldn't go through all of that agony to get there.
Yeah.
Several buses, taxis, motorcycle, taxis, and sometimes ferry boats to get there.
Mm.
So it's tough. It can be tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there certainly is that.
Yeah.
And that is something we try to deal with. Now, they don't all talk to me, but mostly, over the years, several have. And that's encouraging because it means they trust us, looking for answers from us,
Mm.
which is good.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, that kind of segues into the next question, and that's about our Lenten appeal.
Cool.
And I'll just explain what the Lenten appeal is. In 2015, Bishop Grundorf really had an idea that has revolutionized our diocese in many ways. I know St. Philip's cannot be thankful enough because in 2015, we were the recipients of the Lenten appeal. And what it is helping maybe struggling missions, or it's not just here in the States, though. We've done Lenten appeals for global missions. And this year, our Lenten appeal is for global missions. But the goal is to try to raise $100,000 for the mission. And I know when we came here, meaning my family, at that time it was called St. Francis. We renamed the church St. Philip's, but they were actually talking with real estate agents about selling the building. And so when we got here, there was just a handful of people. And because of that Lenten appeal, we are now a parish, not a mission, and thriving. So it's been great. And I know in global missions, it has been great too. I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'm going to let you talk about this, but I know we've helped in terms of building schools over in India for girls. So I'm gonna let you fill in what the Lenten appeal is, not only this time around, but what the Lenten appeal does for global missions.
So actually, the Lenten appeal idea was born in a rented vehicle in India in 2010.
Mm.
So we were in India. I was with Bishop Grundorf, and at that time, Father Johann van der Bijl, who was the Vicar General for Global Partnerships. Bishop Grundorf is the Metropolitan Bishop. And so we were there visiting India, and we recognized this great need for schools. And so Father Johann was very instrumental in establishing partnerships. So earlier I didn't mention the fact that although we have partnerships with churches, we also have partnerships with other NGO, other non-government organizations and groups that are quite active. So one of the groups that we were working with is Operation Mobilization. And so through them, we introduced the idea of having neutral translators. And so at this particular juncture, OM was involved in establishing English medium schools across India to educate mostly Dalit or they're now called scheduled caste children. So it was an English medium education, but they do have a moral curriculum. So it's not a strictly Christian school, but it's a school that promotes English education, which is highly sought after in India, and give an opportunity for Dalits, these untouchables, to break out of the caste system in India and to take jobs that are actually allotted for them, but most times are not filled because they don't have an educational background in order to do the work. So in that vehicle, we talked about the possibility of raising money, $100,000, towards building a school and contributing to. They'd already built about 100 or so schools, and we were going to try to raise money and build another one and try to help that situation. So we were very skeptical. Bishop Grundhoff was concerned. It's like, well, if we ask for 100,000 and we don't make it, makes us look foolish. And so we talked back and forth. And so Bishop Grundhoff then courageously started and launched that idea. So from that year on, so that first year, we raised the money through the province for the school, which we eventually were able to build in Kulur and establish. And so that's continued, and they've switched it off between domestic and foreign needs. And so we've been able to support a number of churches as they progress from a mission status to parish status, to try to give them a full-time clergyman and cover the cost for about 3 years. That's what the $100,000 does domestically, usually. And then for overseas, we've done a number of projects, usually to do with more capital projects, so buildings and motor vehicles, those kinds of things. Not that motor vehicles are capital, because they eventually go away, but so that's what we're engaged in right now. So for this year, 2 or 3 years ago, we had a focus on the Philippines primarily, and we raised money to build churches. And so we've built 3, and we are building 3 more. We have 2 under construction and a third one about to start in the Philippines. So that's as a result of that kind of fundraising. And so now we have this one for 2025, focused on India. Having just gone to India in January, we assessed the needs that were there. So there's 3 basic needs. So it's going to be divided between those different needs. One of them is the fact that for most Christians, they don't have a place to be buried. Hindus typically are just burned, and their ashes are scattered. They're not all that way, but most are. So Christians don't usually have a place to be buried. And so in Jamalamadugu, where the cathedral is in South India, there's a great need for some land for a cemetery. It won't adjoin the cathedral because it's built up completely around, but they need something. When Bishop J.R. Rao died during COVID, they had great difficulty finding a place to bury him. And they had to then negotiate a plot with the CSI, the Church of South India, and at great expense, and they have to pay a retainer, every month to keep it. But they allowed him to be buried there, even though he wasn't a member of their church, because he was well known as a bishop. So that's one of the basic needs. It's, it seems odd, but it is something that's, in order to provide a dignified Christian burial, we already need something like that.
Sure.
And then the second thing is that under the legal system in India, if you have a church property, if it doesn't have a proper boundary wall, it doesn't have to be a huge wall, it just has to be something that you can see as a boundary. So a 3-foot wall or a 4-foot wall around the property demarcates the actual land that belongs to the church. So that means that anybody that comes into that, crosses that boundary wall, and then causes a problem, can be prosecuted. Without the boundary wall, people can come up to your door, hammer it down, rip the cross off your building or whatever, and there's nothing you can really do about it. I mean, you can create a mob scene and people, complain, but nothing can legally, technically be done. It seems odd, but that seems to be the way it works. You can also, anybody that comes through and across the boundary, you can proselytize them. You can't go out of the church boundary to proselytize. That's against the law, but you can proselytize anybody that comes across the boundary into the churchyard, if you like. So so we have 3 churches, at least 3 churches that do not have boundary walls. And they're not a huge expense depending on where they have to be built and the size of the property, but they are kind of an essential to have for the church. And then the third one was to deal with vehicles. The bishop's vehicle, which we bought for Bishop J.R. and now which Bishop Richard now has, is just over 10 years old. But here again, in India, there's a law: vehicles that are older than 10 years cannot cross state lines.
Huh.
So, well, and they can, but there's a lot of paperwork that you have to go through and a lot of extra costs. You pay a tax to cross the state line. So we have church in Andhra Pradesh and now Telangana, which became a separate state. So for Bishop to go into Telangana, he can't use his vehicle.
Huh.
And then the Indian clergy, our other clergy, also have motorcycles. So they have a village church, or in one village they may have a church, but in other villages the Hindu council won't allow a church to be established. But they can go in there and they can minister to people in their homes. So they use the motorcycles to travel to adjoining villages. So usually we have a church in a village, and maybe 3 or 4 villages around is where the clergy visit. So we need motorcycles for them. And I actually also have a need, so the Haitians have motorcycles also, but the roads are so good in Haiti that the motorcycles are completely ruined. I mean, they're terrible. The roads, I'm serious. And so they just sent me pictures, and it's like we've had 2 of our clergy got hurt in motor accidents with these motorcycles. But so we need to replace at least 3 motorcycles in Haiti. And maybe have to have a 4th one, since I have another priest that looks like he is coming to us from the ACC. He'll need a motorcycle also. But those are the kinds of things. So they're relatively inexpensive compared to here. So about $2,000 buys you a motorcycle. So it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I challenge you to find one for $2,000.
That's right.
But so those are the needs for this particular Lenten appeal.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful it's just coming to its conclusion, and I think the funds are appealing to people to send their monies in during this month of May to get things up, and so give us an idea of where we are.
That's great.
We don't always reach the goal. The first one we reached the goal. Most of the domestic ones we've reached the goal, and we've been a bit shy in the foreign ones in the last couple. But I usually find additional donors that I can supplement those with. So
Yeah.
people are very generous once they know the story.
Yeah.
So-
No,
Well, we
that's-
rely on the clergy in each parish to get that information out, and sometimes it goes out for a short time, but not all through Lent.
Yeah.
So people forget, and people don't attend, as you know, every week.
Yeah.
Some hear it and some don't, and some read the email and some look at the web page, and others, the web page is a complete mystery to them.
Yeah.
And they're excited to know we have one. I know Stu's got to drive Stu nuts.
No, it's as I've told you before, Bishop, this is important, and it's a big deal for me to help you in any way get this
Great.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, getting the word out is the hard part. I mean, if I had unlimited funds and I didn't have a parish, I could basically do the tour. I could just go around from church to church, do presentations,
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the advantage, I just think back to a Lenten appeal of just a year or so ago when for St. Dunstan's, Father Mark had that advantage because he could travel around, made himself available to talk to people and to get the word out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
always possible when you have a parish and other things that you have to do. But
Sure.
do the best that we can. Of course, we never have enough money. I can tell you, there's more. The projects exceed the funds every time, but we have to be discerning as to what we choose to do and cover as best we can. We do provide, as I said, monthly support as well as these other more structural type
Yeah.
as well.
Well, I know here we've taken in, funds for the Lenten appeal. We'll need to release those, but the plan is, and I know, I know this is a little unorthodox, but my plan is for Pentecost to have a special offering to really boost
Oh, that's
that.
good. That's
Yeah.
great.
And then we'll send that in. So, yeah. A question, Bishop, and part of this is my ignorance, but a lot has been in the news lately with India and Pakistan.
Right.
How close is that to any of our priests or churches or missions there?
Yeah, our churches are all in the south of India.
Okay.
So imagine, so the Pakistan border's in the north,
Yeah.
and so North India is a different animal, if you like, compared to the south.
Okay.
South is a little more relaxed. It tends to be more lean towards more Christian
Okay.
understanding. Although, I mean, persecution is still there. We have churches where persecution still takes place, but there's a greater acceptance. So Andhra Pradesh is essentially an eastern state now. So imagine the eastern side of India, but the southeastern part. And then further south, the next furthest is the last of those, and that's Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
It's the most southern state there. Then, of course, we have states that are to the west. And so Andhra borders another state called Karnataka.
Mm.
And those are relatively primitive places. And, think of India, you may think of this, you see pictures of big cities, and they have big cities, no question. But really, India is a country of villages, 600,000 villages in India. And that's really the driving force of a lot of what happens in India. The agriculture is all connected to those villages. And so most of the people that we minister to are agricultural workers, or sometimes they work in other fields, but, stonemasons or those, so it's all rough, tough, hands-on kind of work for them. Not well paid, not well protected. They wouldn't meet any of the, the OSHA standards for working.
Yeah.
You don't have, they spray chemicals, with no masks and, gloves and stuff like that. I mean, they're doing all those things in crop fields, usually often by hand, for landlords that own most of the land.
Wow. Well, this has been very good. And one of the things, if we have clergy listening, I encourage them to think about Whit Sunday or Pentecost, whichever jurisdiction you're in, but maybe having a special offering so that people can contribute to that and so that we can really see a last push for this. I think that would be
those go through the treasurer of the APA, Dan Wilder.
Yeah.
I don't have his address. I have his address here, but I mean, I don't know if that will be helpful for anybody. But
Well, I will include that address in the show notes.
Okay, that'd be great.
And
So
I'll
they
put
can
the
look that
link.
up.
Yeah, and I'll put the link to the donation page, which is always up. I mean, it's always possible for people to donate to global missions year round. It's not just a one time of the year thing.
Like
So-
we have other, so we don't just have the Lenten appeal. I mean, we have needs all the time. We have monthly disbursements that have to take place every month. So we dependent on churches that contribute sort of on a regular basis.
right, and that's always
each of those, which is very helpful. So to have some very generous and kind people, and we did receive some monies, but we try to maintain, and keep be as responsible as we can for all of those things. But we have expanding churches, so we can't send just the same. Even though we benefit from an exchange rate that is helpful since we have dollars. And converting that to local currency, but every time we wire money, the local government gouges a little.
Yeah.
And there's always the banks gouge a little because it's charges, and so. But we do benefit from the exchange rate. But as we grow, and we've had to do that in India, so from India we've grown from about 22 churches to 28 churches. So we have to include the monthly allowance for the cost of running the diocese, because the bishop has more churches to visit. We have more clergy to give a little support to.
Sure.
And we try to keep it current. We don't want to exceed what the going rate is in the area. So we look at what the principal churches like Church of South India and others are doing for their clergy. And so we try to match that as best we can. So we have to increase that. In the Philippines, we've had to increase also because we have an increasing clergy. We ordained, I ordained several. And so now we have 7 priests and a deacon. And we'll have, we've got a couple more people that are interested in coming in that are already priested. And then the deacon will be priested in August when we go. And the same is true in Ecuador. Ecuador, we don't do any funding for Ecuador. So we have an education fund which we use to help pay for seminary training and things like that, because that money was given. But Worthy Endeavors is the group that provides the financial support in Ecuador. So we took on all of the episcopal oversight and that aspect. And so we're happy to do that. And we have some educational funds, but Worthy Endeavors have been the group that had the funds to build the churches, to build the magnificent cathedral, which we have in Guamati, and all of those things. So we're very fortunate to have that.
Yeah. No,
we have some interest now and from other parts of the world. So, Diocese of Singapore, which is part of the Anglican Communion, they have some issues there because it incorporates about 7 different countries, that diocese. It's one of the larger ones in that province of Southeast Asia. And there's some distinct issues. Some of them are cultural. The Singaporeans look down on most of the others, Indonesians, and they have Thailand included as well. So there's some issues, and now there's some other liturgical and also theological issues that are causing some discomfort. So I'm in talks right now with some clergy in Indonesia. Whether anything will work or not, I don't know. But we would, if we do that, we'd have to find a source to support them.
Yeah.
The only thing that I can say is I did look at the currency, and so $1 is 16,000 of theirs. So that did look a little hopeful. I don't know what 16,000 of their currency buys, but anyway, it could work. For a few $100 extra, we may be able to support them at the same level that they're currently being supported. But we've got a long ways to go. But there's just those kind of interests all the time.
Yeah.
Come across, and so that's another thing I have to try to negotiate.
Yeah.
When it gets to being serious, then I have to talk to Bishop Chad with Metropolitan and see what we do from there.
No, that's great.
Bishop, have we had any interest from places in the world like Bangladesh? Any areas like that?
Not had from Bangladesh. I'm sure there probably may be, but another tough place to be a Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're heavily Muslim there.
Muslim, right?
Yeah.
And so separated originally, from Pakistan. So that's another whole factional divide. And there are churches, we don't have any of ours, but there are continuing churches in Pakistan. The ACC have churches there.
Okay.
And others have some there too. But it's a tough go.
Yeah.
Persecution is a real deal for many of our foreign churches. And we also, our people experience persecution from Roman Catholics too. Because they make the argument that we're not Catholic.
Oh, okay.
And they've used radio and they've used all kinds of things. And we've tried to work cooperatively in most places. We've done it in Haiti. We had a good cooperative arrangement there, and we've done it in Ecuador. Well, we did it in the Philippines. In Ecuador, we had the hardest time, and we still have the hardest time there. But interestingly enough, the bishop and the group that were so opposed to us in Ecuador were all removed by Vatican several years ago because of corruption and other charges. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
We did have the first problem we ever had. We had in the last year, we had in Mindoro in the Philippines, we had a bishop who, we were quietly doing our work in a place where we weren't very well known. And so he then wrote us an encyclical letter to all the churches in the area, warning them against us, which actually turned out to be unpaid advertising. And a whole lot of people were suddenly interested in what we were doing. And people followed us, followed the services and everything that were live streamed on Facebook. They followed them. And we had just incredible reports from people when they saw, So the ordination service, which I did, which is about nearly 3 hours long, because we had so much to do, and you got translation and everything else. But anyway, some older people who followed it said they hadn't seen services like that for forever, and they thought it was just magnificent. And how could they get in touch, and how could they help the mission? So yeah, people donated all kinds of things, like chairs for the church, and who were Roman Catholics, and they were told they would be excommunicated for doing it, but they did it anyway.
Wow.
So, and that's not the normal policy. So in the Philippines, we usually have a very good relationship.
Yeah.
And so the plan is that next year when we go, we will actually meet with the Ecumenical Council of Roman Catholic bishops in the Philippines. So that's the plan.
Yeah. Oh,
So
that's great. Well, this has been a treat. It really has. And it's so good to have you on here. And, you and Stu can answer this last question. I can't. But that is, how do people find out more? I know that there's even pictures, I think, on the website. You mentioned the cathedral over in Ecuador and some of that.
Yeah.
How do people find out more
Well,
about
as far as the APA webpage, AnglicanProvince.org, you can find the Global Missions page, not only if you scroll down the home page and you see the place for that, but it's also in the front of the menu on the top of the page. It's one of the first things you will see at the top of the website. You will see Global Missions. So you click on that and it will give you it'll give you an overview of all the places that we're working in the world right now. And there's also a link to the donations page, which, like I said earlier, you can donate to Global Missions anytime, and it is absolutely needed, and it's vital, as Bishop said. And we hope to add more information over time and more resources as we can develop them. And it's a big deal, and I want to be able to put as many resources as we can online for folks. And as I work with Bishop David, I hope we can do more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the real hope. I mean, people can email me so what you have on the webpage is really, a thumbnail sketch of what we do.
Right.
And overview of each of those. If you want more information, specific information, they can email me, they can call me on the telephone. I'll be happy to talk to anybody whenever. So I don't know, my email's probably not on there.
You're on the contacts page.
So they can contact
They
me
can-
through the webpage.
Yep.
I get that contact information.
Yeah. And if people contact me, I will absolutely pass along everything to you, Bishop. And
If you need to, if they wanted to call, they can call the APA office, and Lisa will give them my telephone, not my cell
Right.
phone. And it's simple.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm easy to
You
get a
can,
hold
yeah.
of. Everyone can
Yeah.
get a hold of me, and I will absolutely pass the information along to Bishop David.
And I'll talk to anybody anytime about anything. And if anybody wants, has money that they want to give for any specific project, I have people that donate for specific projects. They come to me and said, I have a heart for children. So what do you do for children? What do we have for children that I could do? So I said, well, we have a school in Haiti, and, we have children that come every day. We don't have as many as we used to. The school's not as vibrant as it once was. We used to have 256 students. We have about 67 or 68 this year. But still, they go every day, and, the people are hungry. So
Yeah.
we used to provide meals for them. I said I could do with reinstating that meal program.
Sure.
So, because it's not just, they don't just go out and buy food, and, go to McDonald's. Here's a voucher and go to Chick-fil-A. That doesn't work in Haiti. So what you do is you hire a couple of ladies to come to the school, and they cook. And so they
Okay.
cook a meal. So they'll cook rice and add some protein, hopefully, and so some of those things. So I managed to get a donation to cover the meals at the school.
Oh,
And I had somebody else, ask about, a building project. that might involve children and the school. So I said, well, we used to have bathroom, they're very primitive, long drop toilets at the school, but those are no longer functional. And we went and I did have a plan. I got a plan and a cost about 9 years ago for bathrooms to be built and for a septic system to be installed, but I never got the money. So I have a donation for that now. So now I have to have it in an updated quotation to be able to do it. But we have more than enough money, I think, to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So, those kinds of things, when people talk about things, people have given money for, a mobile clinic in India. So sometimes, though, places like India, it's hard when I get large sums of money, it's hard to transfer the money. The
Yeah.
Indian government prevents the money from being transferred. So we have a certain amount we're allowed to transfer every month, and they monitor us quite closely.
Oh, okay.
So when we do these bigger purchases, we may be able to do it if we deal directly with the landowner, transfer the money to the landowner to purchase the property, for example, or to the car company that we purchase the vehicles from.
Okay.
We'll just send the money, we'll do a purchase order through them and pay them directly from here.
Mhm.
And hopefully we have enough. So that way we don't suffer the ire of the Indian government.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they just block it and then it gets held up for 2-3 weeks and then it just gets returned. So it's
Yeah.
happened a couple of times. We've had that. So,
Yeah. Well, I do encourage anybody that wants to find out more, obviously go to the APA website, but also Bishop David, this is a passion of his. We had him here at the parish several years ago. We're due to have him back, but, and,
That was fun.
won't get into all this, but, he's also dealt with some health issues and stuff. And so now he's back and running marathons and
Not quite. Not quite. We might walk a marathon, but not run it.
yeah. But no, it's great. And Bishop, not just saying this because we're on air, Stu and I were talking about this yesterday. We are very blessed to have you and your heart for this, and guys that you've brought in to help, like Father Paul Rivard. It's been just a tremendous blessing. So we want to be a part of this. And like I said, anybody that's listening, you can contribute through the APA website. Any clergy, you might want to think about having a specific Sunday that you can advertise and then put it out there so that a special offering can be taken, so that we can really see this go to the next level. And that's why we're doing this. And also just to hear Bishop David, that's always a treat. So thank you, Bishop.
Well, thank you so much for having me. A real privilege and honor. And thank you for promoting it so wonderfully.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, if you have any questions or comments, please email us at podcast@stphillipsblacksburg.org or podcast@anglicanprovince.org, and we will make sure that we get those questions answered. And if you need to get in contact with Bishop David, let us know, email us. We will make sure that Bishop David gets your information and answer any questions that you may have. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.